What's up, guys? How's it going? Mr. Arnold coming back to another episode of History Comes Alive. And in this episode of History Comes Alive, we are going to be looking at Part 2 to World War II. Alright, ladies and gents, and we're going to dive back into World War II by specifically looking at both the European and Pacific theaters. We're going to have three different segments. The European theater is going to be the first segment. Our second segment is going to be dealing with the Pacific theater. And then our last segment, ladies and gents, is going to be talking about the lasting legacies of the world wars. Now, before we begin this video, I really want you guys to remember that going into halftime, things are not looking pretty for the Allied countries. The Axis powers are gaining control. I'm specifically talking about Germany, Italy, as well as Japan. They're gaining control here and they're winning the war. However, here in the second half, we're going to start to see the United States of America, Britain, France, as well as the Soviet Union begin to kick some tail. So make sure you guys are taking copious notes and paying close attention. There's a lot of great stuff yet to come.
One, 2. Check me out right here, yo.
What's up, guys? How's it going? Mr. Arnold coming back for this first segment. In this first segment, we're going to be talking about the European theater. Everything that's occurring right here in Europe between 1939 and 1945. As we already know already, that Poland, the invasion of Poland, is going to be the real start. It's going to be the Kickstarter to World War II. We're going to start to see the Nazis invade Poland from the west, and from the east we're going to see, in a joint effort, the Soviets coming in and closing in on Poland. The reason why we're going to have this two-prong attack is because of the non-aggression pact that Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin signed. They basically created a treaty, an alliance, a pact in which they agreed not to invade each other. However, we already know with Adolf Hitler being the untrustworthy person that he already is, that was not a good decision by Stalin. Okay? And we're going to start to see eventually a tide in the war being turned. Okay? But before we really get into that tide being turned, let's look up here at the map. Here at the map, we are going to see much of continental Europe being controlled by the Nazis. I'm talking about places such as Poland, which we had already pointed out, Denmark, Scandinavia, that part of the region of Europe, Scandinavia, the region of Europe in Northern Europe. We're also going to see the French being controlled by the Nazis. And it is going to take great military might and strong-willed men such as Winston Churchill, one of our first ODFPs that we're going to analyze here, that is going to bring a halt to the Nazis. When we talk about World War II, especially with Winston Churchill, remember this, that he's the Prime Minister of England, and he's the last European leader that stands in Adolf Hitler's way. He's ready to go a couple rounds with him and fight back. Adolf Hitler realizes this when Mr. Winston Churchill gains power in England, that he has to take him out as well as the rest of the English people. He sets his sights on bombing England and taking out the will, terrorizing England. We're going to see the London bombings take place in which 40,000 innocent civilians will die from the Luftwaffe, which was Germany's air force. Ladies and gents, Winston Churchill is going to state to his people, we will never surrender, we will never stop fighting. And as a result, he's going to motivate the British victory in the Battle of Britain. He's going to stop the Nazis' advance all throughout Europe, and he's going to halt, for the moment being, the Nazis' advance overall in the rest of Europe. Now, I want you to keep in mind a few things. This being the non-aggression pact. Let's go revisit that right now, the non-aggression pact. Hitler, being the untrustworthy person that he is going to defy Mr. Joseph Stalin. And in 1941, at the border of the Soviet Union, he's going to call for Operation Barbarossa, which will call for the invasion of the Soviet Union. Because Stalin believes he has a pact with Hitler, this is going to totally throw him off, ladies and gents. And he's going to make advances. Hitler and the Nazis are going to make advances into the Soviet Empire. Joseph Stalin and his Red Army are not prepared at that point in time, but they are going to later mobilize and continue fighting, and they're going to fight back against the Nazis. The Nazis are a little bit arrogant at this point in time. Adolf Hitler is building up an ego. He's starting to feel invincible due to all the military victories that he has won in the previous couple of years. And he doesn't realize the military might and the motivation of the Soviet people. Adolf Hitler is going to send his Nazi troops into battle unprepared. They're going to fight well into the Russian winter. And as a result of the Russian winter, we are going to start to see the Nazis freeze their heinies off. They're going to lose out to the Russians, and eventually the Nazis will retreat, which will not taste good in Mr. Hitler's mouth, okay? Because of this being a first loss and because of the Soviets now joining the Allies, we are going to start to see a sandwich effect being played into account here. Because of the great victory at the Battle of Stalingrad for the Soviets, we're going to start to see advancements by the Allies in the East that are going to move west. In addition, in the West, around the English Channel, we're going to start to see the largest amphibious invasion of humankind's history. I'm talking about D-Day. D-Day occurred in 1944, June 6, 1944. They're going to invade through the English Channel, land on the beaches of Normandy, and give the Germans hell. What they're going to do in turn is they're going to liberate all of France, and France will no longer be controlled by the Nazis. The Nazis will be forced to retreat and go back into Germany, and as you're starting to see here, ladies and gents, a sandwich effect. Do not forget about what's occurring in Italy with Benito Mussolini. In 1943, Allied forces will enter through the Italian peninsula and push the Italian fascist regime back up. And as a result, ladies and gents, Benito Mussolini will eventually die. When his Italian fascist regime turns on him, he will be thrown out in the middle of a square and publicly executed. Now that the Allies have turned the tide with the Battle of Stalingrad, with the Soviet advances in the East, we are going to start to see the crumbling of the Nazi Empire. In 1945, the Soviets will make advances over the city of Berlin, and Hitler's empire will no longer be the main cog in Europe. Remember that. Hitler will be forced by himself, basically, to kill himself. He's going to kill himself, shoot his head, he'll commit suicide, and this will be the end of the Third Reich. Eventually, the Soviets will take over the city and claim victory in Europe. Now, when we talk about the European theater, there are a couple atrocious acts that the Axis powers, specifically the Nazis, committed. I'm talking about the Holocaust. We know that the Holocaust, ladies and gents, was the ordered mass killing of not only Jews, but also dissidents, people that went against the Nazi belief. I'm talking about people that spoke out against the Nazi government. I'm talking about homosexuals. I'm talking about handicapped. I'm also going to be talking about gypsies. They're all going to be a part of the Holocaust. 11 million people died during this time period, 6 million of which are Jews. Now, one thing I want you to remember about the Holocaust is that it was a terrible time in the world's history. The Nazis are going to usher in this new order in which they are going to make sure that their ideas and ideologies are being practiced and are being preached. The Jews will have to leave their homes and be sent to concentration camps. Some will starve to death. Others will be publicly executed. However, the key theme to keep in mind is this was dealing with Hitler's new order. It was his vision for the world. But not all of that is going to last. We know at the end of the world wars, the United States, the Allied powers are going to be crowned winners. And we are going to see the Nuremberg trials take place, is what you see right here. The Nuremberg trials were trials in which Nazi leaders who were still alive were tried and were sentenced with specific charges, such as acts against humanity and war crimes. This will be the end of war in the European theater. But the key theme I want you to keep in mind, there's two key themes, and it's this, that Adolf Hitler, because he was kind of an idiot and didn't pay attention in history class to other examples of two battlefront wars in which he's going to fight the Russians in the East and the Allied forces like the Americans and the British in the West, we're going to start to see a sandwich take place, and we're going to start to see the Nazis become defeated. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is, remember the Treaty of Versailles? Well, the Europeans and the world leaders of the time did not want to make the same mistakes twice. So instead of blaming Germany and blaming Italy, they decided to rebuild those countries into becoming thriving democratic countries like we see today. All right, so that's all I have for this first segment. I know it's a little longer dealing with the European theater. We're going to go right into our next segment dealing with the Pacific theater. I'll see you guys there. Alright guys, Mr. Arnold coming back for the second segment. We are going to be talking about the Pacific Theater, ladies and gents. And the Pacific Theater is going to take place between 1931 and 1945. And there's going to be a couple of events that I want to talk about. And in terms of the Axis and the Allied powers involved here, ladies and gents, we are going to be specifically talking about the United States of America and Japan, the Empire of the Rising Sun. So keep in mind the map that you see right here. When we talk about Japan, ladies and gents, keep in mind it's this archipelago of a nation. A chain of islands are going to make up this island nation of Japan. Now Japan, ladies and gents, around 1931 is going to become imperialistic. Remember, with the Meiji Restoration, we are going to see a push to make Japan more modern, make Japan more of an industrial giant in the world. They're going to take that very literal, and they're going to take over other places such as China and Manchuria and the Korean Peninsula. They're going to do this because, as I had stated before, they're becoming an industrial giant, and they need to imperialize to get the raw materials to become that industrial giant. So we're going to see that occur first in 1931. As they continue their expansion, we're going to see them continue moving down south until they see this island of the Philippines. They want the island of the Philippines very, very badly. They really do. But the bad thing that they have to come across, the key thing that you have to remember as far as the Philippines is concerned, is that it is owned or captured and run by the United States of America. So what's going to happen is this. We're going to see the United States of America place an oil embargo on the Japanese because we don't really like how they're building a very nasty and malicious empire, okay? They're becoming very militarized and they're becoming very imperialistic. So we're going to place an oil embargo on them. However, instead of crippling their economy, the Japanese are actually going to do a smart thing and continue expanding into the South Pacific Islands. I'm talking about places such as Guam, such as New Guinea, such as Borneo. They're all going to expand in these areas because they're full of natural resources. And they're going to get past the United States because the United States has only 22,000 soldiers that are going to go up and defend the Philippines. The Japanese are going to bring in 2 million and they're going to take it from Douglas MacArthur and the United States. Now, the president at this time period is President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He is not going to like that. And eventually, ladies and gents, we are going to start to see the Japanese-American relations start to get a little frisky, okay? Start to get a little frisky and tensious. The Japanese are going to fire the first punch when they decide to attack Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. They're going to attack Pearl Harbor and they're going to fire the first punch. And this punch is going to be a devastating one. America's going to fall to the mat. They're going to have to get back up and dust themselves. But it's going to be a very, very hard, stinging punch. The Japanese are going to deal a massive blow to America's naval fleet at the Pearl Harbor attacks. Only 3 aircraft carriers will be present in America's Navy post Pearl Harbor. All right? And we are going to start to see the Japanese continue their advancement all throughout Asia. They're going to bring their new order and their new way of life, just like the Germans did in Europe. Similar to the Germans, they're going to create atrocities such as the rape of Nanjing, in which they are going to publicly massacre millions upon millions of Chinese. We're going to start to see, ladies and gents, that the Bataan Death March, where we see the United States soldiers who are fighting the Philippines subject to hate crimes and war crimes placed upon them when the Japanese take over the island. They're going to become prisoners of war to the Japanese. Eventually, though, we're going to see the tide turn, just like we saw in Europe with the Soviets at the Battle of Stalingrad. We're going to have a decisive battle take place. The United States is going to intercept messages from the Japanese government concerning the tiny island of Midway. Midway was specifically important to the Japanese war effort because if they took over Midway, they'd be extremely close to Hawaii and later would allow them a launching point into the west coast of America, ladies and gents. However, the Japanese were thrown off guard when the Americans surprised them on the seas outside of Midway. And the Americans, in very quick time, in 6 minutes, are able to destroy a large chunk of the Japanese fleet. This is only going to set in course a whole motion of events, such as the American strategy of island hopping. They're going to hop from one island to the next, taking back it from the Japanese. I'm talking about the Marshall and Gilbert Islands. I'm talking about Guam. I'm talking about New Guinea. I'm talking about the Philippines. And eventually, ladies and gents, in 1945, we are going to see the iconic video and image that you see right here, the soldiers lifting up Iwo Jima in 1945. And this will allow us to get very close to the mainland of Japan. However, the war is not going to stop right there. Douglas MacArthur, the general in charge here, is going to ask President Harry S. Truman, yes, we have a new president. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt has died all of a sudden, and his Vice President Harry S. Truman has now assumed control and is now the Commander-in-Chief. Douglas MacArthur, ladies and gents, is going to ask for 1 million men to enter into Japan, making it even larger of an amphibious invasion than D-Day was. However, Harry S. Truman's got a little trick up his sleeve. He's going to order the dropping of the atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which we'll get into our next segment. But eventually, ladies and gents, we are going to see the Japanese Empire fall, and we are going to see victory in the Pacific. Now, going over a couple ODFPs that I want to talk about. Remember, Hideki Tojo, he's going to be the prime minister that is going to allow Japan to rise to great heights as well as stumble back to its humble roots as an island nation. He's going to militarize Japan into becoming a very, very large war machine that's going to take over most of Asia. He will eventually fall and crumble to the United States of America. But the key thing to keep in mind with him is this, that he was very close to allowing the Axis powers to have full control of the Pacific Ocean and the lands that surround it. With Franklin Delano Roosevelt, not only is he going to make a stand with the Europeans in Nazi Germany, but he's also going to make a stand here in the Pacific. He's going to be noted for bold and daring moves, such as the Battle of Midway, and then last but not least, with Harry S. Truman, ladies and gents, he's going to step in and he's going to end the war by dropping the atomic bombs, which we'll talk about in our next segment. That's all I have for this segment, dealing with the Pacific Theater. We're going to move on to our next and last segment. I'll see you guys there. Alright guys, Mr. Arnold running back in here for this last segment. In this last segment, we're going to be talking about the lasting legacy of the World Wars. Okay, there's going to be 4 different sections to this segment, so get ready. Get that seatbelt strapped in here and get ready for the ride. The first one that I want to talk about is technological advancement. During the 2 world wars, World War I and World War II, we're going to see massive technological advancements. And one thing I want you to remember is this, that we are going to see an absurd amount of casualties. Just like we saw in World War I and World War II, there is going to be a large amount of casualties on both sides, the Axis and the Allied powers. In addition to that, you cannot forget about the impact of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the 2 cities in which the United States dropped atomic bombs on. The key thing to keep in mind about that is that it's going to bring an end to world wars, and it's going to also start maybe a new conflict, a new tension between our next section, where we're going to see superpowers emerge. After the world wars, ladies and gents, we are going to see the United States as well as the Soviet Union emerge as the 2 most powerful countries in the world, okay? This is basically going to be a capitalism versus communism debate. In Russia, ladies and gents, Joseph Stalin has kind of brainwashed his people into thinking that capitalism is the root of all evil. And in America, there's going to be anti-communist sentiment. That's going to be anti-communist feelings. In a result of this, we are going to start to see the Cold War develop post-World War II. And a new conflict will be started. A new conflict will be brewed. Moving along, after World War II, we are also going to start to see a push for world peace. We know before World War II and post-World War I, there was an attempt with the League of Nations. However, the League of Nations, ladies and gents, was very, very weak, okay? There was really no bite to what they were providing, no real discipline. There were people such as Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini that defied the Treaty of Versailles, ladies and gents. and we needed a strong international organization that would bring peace. So after World War II, we are going to start to see the League of Nations develop. The League of Nations, ladies and gents, will be utilized to help bring diplomacy into international problems instead of resulting in war and conflict. The key theme I want you guys to remember about the push for peace is this, that we want to see no longer the same mistakes as we saw with the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was a very poorly done treaty in which they blamed Germany, in which they blamed countries for World War I. Post-World War II, Japan, Germany, Italy will not be blamed. Instead, they will be rebuilt, and there will be structure to kind of that rebuilding of their nations. Last but not least, we're going to talk about decolonization. Decolonization will take place, and I want you to know, decolonization, that means the end of colonization. We'll start to see lots of European powers lose imperial countries, imperial colonies that they once had before. I'm talking about places such as Africa, as well as Asia. We're going to start to see, with decolonization, new countries form, and this will lead to even more conflict, which we'll get into later with topics. But what I want you guys to remember about the second half of World War II is this, that we are going to start to see the Axis powers eventually lose the lead that they built up to the Allied powers, and they're going to come back swinging with a knockout punch, both in Europe as well as in the Pacific. Alright, that's all I have for this video dealing with part 2 to World War II. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please feel free to give me a like or a comment or subscribe. I'll see you guys next time for this episode of History Comes Alive. I'm out of here. I'll see you guys later. Take care.